The Anderson family Christmas party always smelled like cinnamon and condescension. I stood in the corner of my uncle's oversized living room, nursing a glass of wine that probably cost more than what he thought I made in a week, watching the usual drama unfold. "So, Olivia," Uncle Jack's voice boomed across the room, drawing everyone's attention just the way he liked it. "Still running that little boutique of yours. What do you call it again? The fashion? Something? Impress Collective." I replied calmly, though my grip on the wine glass tightened slightly. "And yes, it's doing quite well, actually. We've expanded to 3 locations this year." He laughed, that particular laugh he reserved for when he wanted to make someone feel small. "That's cute. You know, if you ever want to learn about real business, you should come shadow me at Anderson Technologies for a day. Show you how the big boys play." My cousin Marcus, Jack's son and heir apparent, snickered from his position by the fireplace. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first month's rent, but somehow still managed to look like a boy playing dress-up. "I appreciate the offer," I said, taking another sip of wine, "but I'm actually quite busy with my own ventures." "Ventures?" Uncle Jack's eyebrows shot up. "Selling dresses isn't exactly what I'd call a venture, sweetheart. Now, take what we're doing at Anderson Tech. We just closed a deal with Microdyne Systems. That's real business." I noticed my father shift uncomfortably in his seat. He'd worked under his older brother Jack at Anderson Technologies for 30 years, always one step below the top, always almost but not quite good enough. The company had been started by our grandfather, but somehow Jack had maneuvered his way into controlling everything by the time he was 40. "The Microdyne deal," I said thoughtfully. "That's the one where you're supplying their new manufacturing line with processing chips, right?" Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. "Been reading the business pages, have we?" "Something like that." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been doing a lot more than reading. The little boutique was just the visible tip of a very large, very carefully constructed iceberg. While they were all busy underestimating me, I'd built something they couldn't even imagine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another update from my real office. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the sound of Jack launching into another story about his latest business triumph. The message was from Sarah, my COO. "Sterling acquisition is complete. We're ready to announce whenever you give the word." I smiled, thinking about what was coming. Sterling Industries was Microdyne's primary chip supplier, or at least, they had been until about 20 minutes ago. Now they belonged to Nova Technologies, my company. The company nobody in my family knew existed, because I'd built it under my mother's maiden name, Matthews. I walked back into the living room just in time to hear Uncle Jack holding court about women in business. "Look," he was saying, gesturing with his whiskey glass, "I'm not saying women can't work, but certain industries require a particular kind of thinking, strategy, aggression. It's just biology." "Really?" My cousin Jessica, Jack's daughter, sat silently beside him. She had an MBA from Harvard and had been trying to get a management position at Anderson Technologies for 2 years. Jack kept finding reasons why she wasn't ready. "Speaking of strategy," I said, unable to help myself, "what's your contingency plan if Sterling Industries changes their supply terms?" The room got quiet. Jack stared at me like I'd just spoken in tongues. "Sterling? They're locked into a 10-year contract with Microdyne. Besides, they're family-owned old school. They don't make waves." I checked my watch. Interesting perspective. Just then, Jack's phone rang. Then Marcus's. Then half the phones in the room started buzzing. I watched as Jack's face went from annoyed to confused to something approaching panic as he read whatever was on his screen. This has to be a mistake, he muttered, scrolling frantically. Sterling just announced they're under new ownership. Some company called Nova. But that's impossible. I was just golfing with their CEO last week. Nova Technologies, I said clearly, causing every head in the room to turn toward me. Founded 5 years ago, specializing in next-generation processing solutions and strategic acquisitions. Jack's face started to redden. How do you? I pulled up the Wall Street Journal app on my phone and held it out to him. There it was, in bold headlines. Nova Technologies acquires Sterling Industries in surprise move. CEO Elizabeth Matthews signals aggressive expansion plans. Elizabeth Matthews, I said quietly, is my mother's maiden name. And Nova Technologies is my company. You know, the one I built while you were all so busy laughing at my little boutique. The silence in the room was absolute. I could practically hear their minds racing, recalculating every interaction we'd had over the past 5 years. That's not possible, Marcus sputtered. You sell clothes. I do, I agreed. The boutiques are quite profitable actually, but they're also excellent places to meet people. CEOs' wives, board members' daughters. You'd be amazed what people talk about while trying on designer dresses. I turned to Uncle Jack, who looked like he might actually pass out. By the way, about that Microdyne deal, you might want to call them. Since Nova now controls their chip supply, I imagine they'll be interested in renegotiating terms. You can't. Jack started, but his phone rang again. The caller ID read, Microdyne CEO. I gathered my coat and bag, ready to leave. But first, I turned to Jessica. I'm expanding my executive team at Nova. If you're interested in a job where your Harvard MBA actually gets put to use, call me Monday. As I walked toward the door, I heard Uncle Jack's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it before. Olivia, wait. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Sorry, Uncle Jack. I'd love to stay and chat, but I have a merger to manage. You know how it is, real business for real players. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, leaving behind a room full of people who were just beginning to realize that while they'd been dismissing me, I'd been building an empire. And this was just the beginning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of chaos I'd carefully orchestrated. My phone had 47 missed calls, mostly from family members who suddenly wanted to catch up. I sat in my real office, the one none of them had ever seen, on the 45th floor of downtown's most prestigious building, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold. Ms. Matthews? My assistant Michael appeared at the door. Microdyne's executives are in the main conference room. And your uncle's been in the lobby for an hour. I smiled, checking my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sharp black suit, not a hair out of place. Power, but subtle. Let's not keep them waiting. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 5 men in expensive suits sat around the mahogany table, including Thomas Chen, Microdyne's CEO. Uncle Jack wasn't among them. He was still downstairs, probably fuming that his name couldn't get him past security. Gentlemen, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. I believe we have some contracts to discuss. Thomas Chen cleared his throat. Ms. Matthews, or should I say Ms. Anderson, this is unexpected. Elizabeth Matthews is fine, I replied smoothly. Now about Anderson Technologies' chip supply agreement. I've reviewed the terms. They're significantly below market rate. We have a binding contract, one of their lawyers interjected. With Sterling Industries, I corrected. Sterling is now Nova Technologies, and while we'll honor existing agreements, any renewal will be at current market rates, plus a 20% premium for historical undervaluation. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. That would significantly impact our bottom line. True, I agreed. However, Nova can offer something Anderson Technologies can't. Next-generation processing capability. Our R&D division has developed chips that are 40% more efficient. We've kept that quiet until now. I slid folders across the table to each of them. Inside were the specs that made their eyes widen. 5 years of secret development, funded by the profits from my little boutiques, and some very strategic early investments. This is, Thomas started. Revolutionary, I finished, and exclusive to Nova's direct partners. So, gentlemen, shall we discuss new terms? 2 hours later, I had signed a deal that would effectively end Anderson Technologies' main revenue stream within 6 months. As the executives filed out, Thomas lingered. You know, he said quietly, your uncle tried to convince me you were some sort of corporate raider. Said you had no real business experience. I raised an eyebrow. And I just watched you command a room of seasoned executives like you've been doing it for decades. Whatever else you are, Ms. Matthews, you're clearly your grandfather's heir in ways that have nothing to do with the family name. After they left, I finally called security to send Uncle Jack up. He burst into my office like a storm cloud in an Italian suit. How dare you, he started. You manipulative little. Careful, Uncle Jack, I cut him off. You're in my building now, and I don't tolerate that kind of language in my workplace. He deflated slightly, looking around my office, twice the size of his, with better views and modern art pieces worth more than his car. How? He asked finally. How did you do this without any of us knowing? I learned from you, actually, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. All those years watching you manipulate and maneuver, thinking no one noticed. I noticed everything. I just had a different plan. The boutiques were perfect cover and surprisingly profitable. It turns out when you treat people with respect and actually listen to them, they become incredibly loyal customers and investors. His face darkened. You're trying to destroy me. No, Uncle Jack, I'm trying to build something better. You spent years telling me and Jessica and every other woman in the family that we weren't cut out for real business. I spent those same years proving you wrong. The Microdine contract is being renegotiated as we speak. They're moving all their chip supply to Nova. You might want to warn your shareholders. He slumped in his chair, suddenly looking older. What do you want? Want? I smiled. I want you to go back to the office and explain to your board why you never saw this coming. I want you to tell Jessica why you really kept her out of management. I want you to experience what it feels like to be underestimated and dismissed. I'll fight this, he threatened weakly. You can try. But first, you might want to look into who's been quietly buying Anderson Technologies stock over the past 3 years. Here's a hint. Check under the name Matthews Investment Group. His face went pale. How much? 28%. Not enough for control, but enough to make the next shareholders' meeting very interesting. A knock at my door interrupted us. Jessica walked in, looking professional and determined in a suit that actually fit her role. Sorry I'm late, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Traffic was terrible. Late? Jack looked between us, realization dawning. Yes, I said. Jessica starts today as Nova's new Chief Strategy Officer. Her Harvard MBA will be put to good use here. You can't just take my daughter. She's not yours to keep or take. I cut him off. She's a brilliant executive who deserves a chance to prove it. Unlike you, I believe in promoting people based on talent, not gender. Jessica placed a folder on my desk. The preliminary audit of Anderson Technologies' project management systems, as requested. There are significant irregularities. Jack stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. This is betrayal. No, Jessica said firmly. This is business. Isn't that what you always taught us? I watched my uncle storm out, knowing this was just the beginning. The real battle would come at the shareholders' meeting next month. But I was ready. I'd been ready for years. Well, Jessica said after he left, that was dramatic. Welcome to real business, I replied with a smile. Now let's talk about phase 2. Because while they thought the Sterling acquisition was my endgame, it was really just my opening move. I had 5 years of careful planning to unveil, and a family empire to rebuild, this time with a very different kind of leadership. The game was just beginning. The Anderson Technologies shareholders meeting was held in the same hotel ballroom where, 15 years ago, I'd watched my grandfather hand control of the company to Uncle Jack instead of my father. I remembered sitting in the back row, barely out of college, watching my father's face as his older brother took everything he'd worked for. Today, I sat in the front row. The tension in the room was palpable. News of the Microdyne contract loss had hit hard. Anderson Technologies' stock had dropped 30% in 2 weeks. The shareholders were out for blood, and Uncle Jack was sweating on the stage. As you can see from our projections, he was saying, his voice lacking its usual confidence, we have several promising alternatives in development. What about Nova Technologies? Someone called out. Is it true they now control our entire supply chain? Jack's eyes found mine in the crowd. I smiled pleasantly. We are in negotiations with Nova, he managed. Is it also true that Nova's CEO is your niece? Another shareholder demanded. The same niece you repeatedly denied a position on the board? Before he could answer, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. My father walked in, followed by a team of lawyers. Right on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, my father announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. I have here documents that should interest all of you. He began distributing folders to the board members. I watched Jack's face as he opened his copy, saw the moment he realized what he was reading. These records show systematic discrimination in hiring and promotion practices, my father continued. They also show irregular accounting of project funds over the past decade, all approved by our current CEO. The room erupted in chaos. Board members were flipping through pages, shareholders were shouting questions. Through it all, I remained seated, calm and composed. This is a trick, Jack shouted over the noise. A conspiracy between my brother and my niece too. To what, Uncle Jack? I stood finally, walking toward the stage. To expose the truth. To show how you've been running this company like your personal kingdom. I took the microphone from him. The room quieted. My name is Olivia Anderson. Though some of you may know me as Elizabeth Matthews, CEO of Nova Technologies. 15 years ago, I sat in this room and watched my grandfather's legacy being twisted into something he never intended. Today, I'm here to restore it. I nodded to my lawyers, who began distributing another set of documents. What you're receiving now is a proposal. Nova Technologies is offering to merge with Anderson Technologies. A full restructuring, new management, and immediate implementation of the next-generation processing technology that Microdyne has already signed on for. The room buzzed with excitement. These were business people, after all. They could see the potential. This merger would not only save the company but position it as a market leader in tech innovation. The Anderson name would remain, but the company culture would change. No more discrimination. No more nepotism. No more old boys club. "You can't do this," Jack sputtered. "The board would never." Actually, one of the board members stood up. "Given these revelations and the company's current position, we're obligated to consider any offer that could protect shareholder value." And with Matthews Investment Group's 28% stake, another added, "combined with the proxy votes Ms. Anderson has already secured, I believe she has the numbers." I turned to face my uncle directly. "You told me to stick to my little shop. That real business was for men." "Well, Uncle Jack, this is real business, and you've just been outmaneuvered by a girl who sells dresses." The vote was almost unanimous. By the end of the day, I was standing in my grandfather's old office, now my office, looking out over the city. The portrait of him still hung on the wall, his kind eyes seeming to twinkle with approval. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Jessica, carrying a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "So," she said, pouring the drinks, "CEO of both Nova and Anderson Technologies. Not bad for someone who was supposed to stick to retail." I laughed, taking a glass. "How's your father taking it?" "He's adjusting." The board's severance package helped soften the blow, though I think his ego took a hit when they named me Chief Operating Officer. "You earned it," I said firmly, "and not because you're his daughter or my cousin, because you're brilliant at what you do." We clinked glasses and looked out at the sunset painting the sky in shades of victory. "You know," Jessica said thoughtfully, "I kept wondering all these years why you never fought back when they dismissed you. Now I understand. You were playing the long game." "I learned something important running those boutiques," I replied. "Success isn't always about being the loudest or most aggressive. Sometimes it's about being patient, observant, and building something so solid they can't ignore it when you finally reveal it." My phone buzzed. Another message from Thomas at Microdyne, confirming our expanded partnership. On my desk, the Wall Street Journal's headline read, "Nova Anderson merger reshapes tech landscape. Elizabeth Matthews makes history." To the future of Anderson Technologies, Jessica raised her glass. "To doing business our way," I corrected. Later that night, I visited my grandfather's grave. I placed a copy of the merger announcement against his headstone. "You always said the company needed new blood," I whispered. "I hope this is what you meant." As I drove home, I thought about the little girl who used to sit in board meetings, taking notes while everyone ignored her. The young woman who opened a little boutique while secretly building an empire. The CEO who finally showed them all what real business looks like. Uncle Jack had been right about one thing. Business was about strategy and aggression. He just never realized that sometimes the most aggressive move is the one your opponent never sees coming. And as for that little shop, I kept it running, a reminder of where it all started. Because sometimes the biggest victories come disguised as small beginnings.